Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a book review from the Most Wanted series, and it's book number 8, Night of the Puppet People. Now, for the next couple of reviews I will be doing, I'm playing a little bit of catch up. I had a lot of stuff happen around the holidays, and I had a lot of things going on around January, and I had some books I read that I just didn't have time to get around to making reviews for. And this book was one of the books I read and was planning on reviewing, but I got sidetracked. So I read it initially and I read it a second time to kind of refresh my memory because I had forgotten this entire book essentially. And after rereading it, I can see why I forgot this book. This book, in my opinion, now this might upset some people. I think this book is a genuine bad book in the Goosebumps franchise. And I'll explain why near the end. But I was very disappointed with this book. On the surface level, I think a lot of people would look at the title, look at the cover, and automatically assume that it's a reskin of the Night of the Living Dummy books. And sometimes intuition and gut feeling pays off, and in this situation, it's pretty much no different. It is essentially a Night of the Living Dummy ripoff, reskin, whatever you want to call it. And off the bat, I just want to say that this book, for its ideas that it did have for originality, it just soured by the end of the story, and majority of it felt like something we've already read before. So yeah, let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So in the Most Wanted series, often you'll see books start out with a prologue like this book did. So this book starts 7 years in the past, told in third person. And it centers around a birthday party of two twin 5-year-olds. One's name is Ben and one's name is Jenny. They're brother and sister, fraternal twins. And they have this birthday party with some guests, and they have this act that's going to use these marionette puppets. This guy is dressed up like a wizard and has brought this sultan puppet and this princess puppet. But at the birthday party, something happens with these puppets. One of them, bites the shoulder of Ben, and the other, pinches the nose of Jenny. And this frightens all the kids, and the wizard act guy bolts out with the marionette puppets, and that's all we learn from the beginning prologue of this book. And I'm not going to lie, the prologue was pretty okay. Almost borderline good. It had a lot of tamed violence going for it. This is a modern book. This isn't like the mid to late 90s Goosebumps era where you'll see violence turned up, like, let's say, Series 2000. But after reading the prologue off the bat, I got the sense of Series 2000 was coming ahead in the story, and it kind of does show up later on. But after that event, after the wizard bolts out with the marionettes, it pretty much ends the prologue. And it cuts to 7 years later, modern time. And the perspective has changed from the third person to the point of view of Ben in the story. And pretty early on, we reunite with Jenny, and we also get a new character called Bird. Now, Bird is revealed to be the son of the guy who played the wizard at their birthday party years ago. But for Brad and Jenny, they really have no memory of the events prior. And that, is throughout the middle portion of the book, you understand that this is kind of a repressed memory thing going on, which may or may not pay off, and we'll get into that. So, Ben, Jenny, and Bird are looking forward to this talent show contest coming up, and they are struggling to find an act. And while they're talking about the talent show and the prize money of $500, and Ben's talking about what he would love to do with that money, we meet these two girls named Anna and Maria. Now, Anna and Maria are your typical, very mean-spirited type of Goosebumps characters. They're just really snarky. They come off like they're do-gooders, like they're better than everyone. Kind of similar to Courtney from You Can't Scare Me, except in a negative tone in the story. Anna and Maria are easily made to be dislikable, and that's their function of the story. And the trio of kids learn that Anna Maria want to utilize some marionette puppets for their talent, And the trio of kids are now trying to figure out something cooler to do than the marionette puppets. So these kids get the bright idea to go, rummaging around, seeing what stuff they can find, and they end up in Bird's attic. And while they're up in the attic, they discover this thing that was locked in the attic, and they break into it, and they discover not 2 marionette puppets, but 3 marionette puppets. A third one magically appeared out of nowhere that wasn't mentioned in the flashback, but there's a sultan puppet, there's a princess puppet, and now there's a knight puppet. And they get this idea that maybe they can use the marionette puppets for their talent in the talent show as a form of revenge in a couple of ways. It'll make Anna and Maria upset because they're also doing marionette puppets. And they also think if they can make the show even better, they can one-up the two and make them look like complete fools. So they're pretty much sold on this idea. The only issue is that Bird's parents, specifically his dad, had hid these up in the attic for a reason, and Bird doesn't want his dad to find out that they're using these marionette puppets. So the 3 of them decide to, disclose the information, and the other 2 are having, the 2 twins are having a sleepover at Bird's house the same night. Now, what ends up happening is that there's a thing going on in the middle of the night where Ben thinks he hears something, from upstairs in the attic, and he goes to investigate, and it ends up being a fake out. It's a squirrel, and then Bird's dad becomes involved, and what can you do? But the trio of kids still manage to get the marionette puppets out of the house, and they sneak it to school the next day. They stay after, where they have these, tryouts for the talent show, and Anna and Maria do their talent, and it's good. They have good costumes. There's other talents like kazoo playing and clarinet playing, stuff like that. And when it comes to the trio's turn, they use their marionette puppets, and this obviously upsets the 2 girls, Anna and Maria, and they plead that, hey, they can't do this. We're doing marionette puppets. And the teacher, person in charge, was like, you know what? This is fair. There's no rule saying there can't be 2 acts of marionette puppets. And the whole auditorium was laughing at their performance, so they thought that there was enough room for 2 acts. And this really upsets the 2 girls, and they disappear or storm off or something, and they go and put their marionette puppets in the art room for safekeeping. And when Ben and Jenny and Bird finish their act, they end up back to the art room later on, after all the other applicants for the talent show had finished their acts, and something had happened. Now, I don't want to spoil what it is, but essentially Maria and Anna's puppets got vandalized, and that led to a confrontation in the principal's office with the trio of kids. And then immediately after that, they went to go get their puppets, and then something else happened with their puppets that got them in trouble. And let's just say they got suspended, and they got banned from the talent show altogether. Now, I didn't want to spoil that, but I feel like if I told you that, you'll kind of understand the context later on. So they've been suspended. They're now no longer allowed in the talent show. But after a week of being suspended, they still are messing around with these marionette puppets, still trying to perfect this act, still trying to come up with some type of revenge against the girls, because there's a big revelation that happens, and I don't want to spoil this part, whether if the trio was being pranked or maybe these puppets were alive. I don't want to spoil exactly what it is. I kind of want you to figure that out. But yeah, there's an element there which really irritates the trio of kids, and now they want to definitely make a better marionette show than the 2 girls. But now Bird's dad's gotten involved and has demanded that they put away the puppets forever. But before this could happen, Ben has this very weird interaction with one of the puppets, and it may or may not hint that this puppet specifically is alive, and it gives him a little electric shock, which then after this shock happens, the whole story 180s from a revenge type of story to this science fiction body horror story that goes rather south very quickly here. So essentially, Ben gets electrocuted by this puppet and slowly starts turning into a puppet himself. Now, the body horror in this part of the story is actually pretty good, but it is rather tame compared to some Series 2000 books that came before it. But this part of the book was pretty well done. It was a callback to those Series 2000 books, and it was kind of gross and very, I want to say, the most descriptive out of the books I've read, but it was descriptive enough to kind of unsettle me. So kudos to that. Pretty jarring stuff there. And the trio of kids freak out, and they're trying to find a cure for Ben. Now becomes, instead of getting revenge on the two girls, now it's about curing Ben. And the whole story shifts and recontextualizes. They find this card in one of the puppets' pockets that fell out. And it has an address on it that's downtown, so they, use their bus pass. They take a bus ride to a bad part of town, and they find this abandoned-looking building, and they sneak in through the back. And this is where the climax happens. They discover somebody's inside, the person who's potentially behind the puppets that infected Ben. There's a big revelation about these puppets, whether they're evil, not really. I mean, let me take this back. It's not even a big revelation. There's a hint that these puppets might be evil, because I'm going to be honest, the story doesn't explain anything from this point on. These puppets are told to the characters that they're evil or a bad batch by this puppet maker, and he has this machinery to cure Ben from the infection of puppet cells that's turning him rapidly into a puppet, right? So after a couple of fake outs here and there and a couple of suspicious things going on, Ben is actually cured. But then a big twist happens. Very predictable, very nonsensical, in where, surprise, the puppet maker's the real evil one. Or is he? It's not really answered there. But luckily the trio of kids manage to escape, and then we reach to the end of the story, and I would even call this the true end of the climax here. They have decided to attend the talent show since they're banned from performing in it, and they can never win the $500. They're just going to boo everyone out of spite. I don't know why, but that really shows the true colors of these kids all along at that point of the story. And there's a big plot twist involving one of the performances, and that's where it leaves you, and it leaves you pretty dumbfounded. And that, in a nutshell, is Night of the Puppet People. Okay, so, yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff happens in this story, but let's just get off with the positives, the few positives I do have, because like I did mention early on, I think this book is a rather bad book. The few positives I have is this idea of this suppressed memory. And I didn't bring this up during the review, but I kind of want to touch on it now. The repressed memory, right, is introduced because these two twins have totally forgotten this memory from their, 5-year-old birthday, when they were 5. And it seems like their mind kind of blocked it out for traumatic reasons. And I thought that this mechanism was going to carry throughout the story and kind of serve a greater purpose near the end, and maybe offer some commentary about trauma itself. But there's a point in the story where after they have a conversation with, their friend Bird and the dad, they then remember the birthday party. And it's like they didn't even faze them when they found out. They're like, oh yeah, that happened, but we still need these puppets to get revenge. It served no real payoff to have that mechanism in the story, and I felt that was one of the biggest missed opportunities the story could have had, is offering some commentary to that. It could have set itself apart from other stories that have run the formula of the Night of the Living Dummy books. It could have kind of tied into that and gave a little more personal touch, a little more somber note, a little more depressing elements. You could have done so much with it, Stein, and you just chose not to do anything serious with it. I feel really bummed on that regard when it comes to the suppressed memory mechanism in the story, not having really any payoff at all. But it is a positive in that it gave me hope throughout reading this. So, yeah. I guess that's a positive and a negative at the same time. But the biggest positive I have is some of the body horror in this book really holds up well. And some of the violence in the prologue was pretty good as well. This book has those Series 2000 notes in it. And as a person who loves Series 2000, I was quite impressed with those scenes. Like, I was pretty jarred. I was pretty scared. It had me. It legit had me. Yeah. But let's put all those positives aside. Let's get into the negatives, because I have a lot to unpack with these negatives. So, off the bat, like I said, the prologue was okay. But when we get into the meat of the story, the first 90 or so pages, including the prologue, right? The story feels so familiar that I'm like, where did this come from? And a lot of what happens in the first 2 or 3 acts can be compared to Son of Slappy, which is in the same series as this. Very similar, with like a fundraiser talent show in Son of Slappy, whatever that thing was. And in this story, it's just a talent show for money. It feels kind of muddled, and the plot, direction feels identical almost. It's just something about it. And also, the mechanism of finding puppets in the attic calls back to Night of the Living Dummy 3. These trio of characters essentially could be the trio of kids from Night of the Living Dummy 3, from what I remember. They really don't have anything stand out about their personalities besides the trauma incident from their childhood, but like I said, that gets wasted. And I've really found myself struggling to try to identify with these characters, because they really didn't have much personality to them, other than they had this urging sense of greed and revenge involved. And it just came off mean-spirited, which I'm also not a fan of characters that are kind of disconnected in that realm of they're just so waist deep in wanting revenge or money or something that they fail to see the big picture. And I feel like Ben is no different from the main protagonist of the rest of the story besides the prologue. He's just very one-sided. He doesn't really have much depth to him. I was hoping that suppressed memory would bring something out of him, but really it didn't. And that's really unfortunate for this book. It just fails to separate itself from the books that it's imitating that came before it. And it kind of makes it unoriginal. It's a very unoriginal story in that regard. It's a very shell-like book. Very safe played. Besides the 180 turn in the final act, but for the most part, the majority of the story was very safe, very shell-like, very uniform, kind of tame. There's really no atmosphere selling the book. It's very generic. Generic is probably the best word, just generic. But let's get to the 180 turn in the final act, and this is arguably where the book just completely falls apart here. Once Ben realizes the memory and the suppressed memory and it does nothing for him, that bummed me out. But then the whole puppet, electrocuting him and turning him into a puppet because of infecting him with puppet cells, and this whole wonky science fiction bit near the end literally makes no sense in the context of the story. I think Stein had so much thrown at the wall and thrown into the kitchen sink near the end that a lot of it just mixed together and failed to stick. It's just a jumbled mess, to put it, bluntly here. I think the ending to this book is arguably the most entertaining part and the worst part of the story at the same time. And that's not good. When you have such a generic book like this, and then you crank it up, turn up the volume, start throwing some weird ideas out there, trying to see if, some shock value can be taken out of this. the shock value is kind of worn thin when the context isn't there to be shocked. You know what I mean? So Ben is turning into a puppet. He's now about self-preservation more than revenge. They go downtown. They meet this guy who apparently made these puppets. And apparently the puppets they have are this Bad Batch type of puppets, or maybe they're evil, or maybe they're good. It's never really solidified. And the puppet dude is so predictably evil that these fake outs seem like it's wasting page space. And even then, that's the puppet maker isn't resolved at all. And there's a sense of unresolvedness going into the final pages of the story. And when the final ending and the final twist happens, it's just completely stupid because it lacks logic compared to what Ben went through. Why would this happen if Ben went through this? It makes no sense. Nothing makes sense in the ending. I'm just being honest. It's just one of those stories that just try to throw a monkey wrench in the equation and it just jumbles up the rest of the book. Like I said, that 180 kind of recontextualizes the whole book. It shifts from revenge to self-preservation, then back to revenge. It just doesn't work. Nothing was made to fit as a puzzle piece to a concise story. So, after all that, the entire reading experience to me felt like this book had some ideas it wanted to bring, but it just didn't deliver on any of it. It's very unoriginal, very generic, especially in the first 2/3 of the book. And the final third was so wild and so hectic and random after the 95-page mark. Now, mind you, this book is 136 pages, so it did take quite a while to get to this point, which is also another drawback I have. It just takes forever to get to this final part, to the entertaining part, to the entertaining but bad part of the book. But when it gets there, it just falls apart because all the good direction it had going for it early on is basically dropped. And there's really nothing there to hold my interest besides, the suppressed memory and all that. After that was dropped, I was basically just, this book is just going to be whatever. So, yeah. So, for all the problems I mentioned, because I did say a lot, off the bat, all you need to know is the main ones. I deducted a full point off the bat for the lack of originality. It had maybe 20% originality going for it. 80% is strictly verbatim done in Night of the Living Dummy books before it. Specifically, even Son of Slappy. So maybe maybe it had 15% originality. But, yeah, lack of originality gets a full point. I deducted another full point, so now we're down to 3 at the base for how boring and generic this book was for majority of the read. It just wasn't captivating. Like I said, the only thing really holding me on was this suppressed memory, and that's kind of sad because the characters didn't have me, the atmosphere didn't have me, the premise didn't have me, the villains, the perceived villains of Anna and Maria sucked, and then by the end, I realized that these trio of kids that we've been reading the whole time, they also equally suck because what they decide to do after the whole climax is coming down. It just really, it really sours my taste for how just abysmal this book was as a whole. And then I deducted another 0.3 off for the end to the book. There were some cool ideas that could have made make sense if there was some right context in there. Just didn't have enough context to glue it together, and it's just a big gooey mess of stuff going on at the end. So I landed with this book at a 2.7 out of 5. Very disappointed with this book. It's a D- for me. It's below the passable, okay, not good but not bad. So it's a bad book, but it's not terrible. There are way worse books than this in the Goosebumps franchise that try less than this book did. This book did try to insert some things there that I could have enjoyed. And I did get some sense of scares out of a couple of scenes, so that's what prevented me from actually tanking this book to an F. So, yeah, I think a 2.7 out of 5 is pretty fair for this book. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on Night of the Puppet People. Let me know down in the comment section, what did you think of this book? Did you love this or did you hate this? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.